One of the things that I really enjoy is seeing bold new takes on obscure Batman villains in the media. Yeah, I know it's a pretty niche interest, but what can I say? I am who I am. As a kid, I voraciously flipped through the Who's Who in the DC Universe specials, committing all these weird and wonderful characters to memory. That's one of the reasons why I loved Batman the Animated Series so much. It introduced villains who, until then, had never appeared outside of the comics like Two-Face, Ra's al Ghul and Killer Croc. Whenever a new Batman show drops, I always look forward to seeing the big names like the Joker. But I'm also on the lookout for how they handle the obscure villains. I think these characters are the most open to reinvention, which makes them more exciting, to me anyway. This brings me to Creature Commandos, the recently released show from DC Studios. It's the first project in their interconnected universe with continuity shared across both animation and live action, which is pretty ambitious. The show adapts a deranged Batman villain from the 1970s, arguably for the first time in mainstream media, and that is Doctor Phosphorus. Now, most of the shows I tend to talk about are suitable for all audiences, but Creature Commandos is an adult show with graphic violence, swearing and sex scenes. I'll try to avoid showing the most gratuitous stuff, but for those of you that watch these videos with your children, I know there are a lot of you, maybe skip the Creature Commandos segment. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's start by looking at the original comic book version. Doctor Phosphorus first appeared in Detective Comics number 469 in 1977. He was a radioactive skeletal figure who poisoned Gotham's water supply and murdered high-profile industrialists, all in the name of revenge. His real name was Alexander Sartorius, a wealthy businessman who desperately wanted to join the influential and completely corrupt Gotham Tobacconists Club. The club consisted of Gotham's most powerful businessmen, and they favoured their own. Sartorius was convinced by the corrupt councilman Rupert Thorne to invest in a nuclear plant just outside of the city. However, Thorne neglected to mention that the plant was deeply unpopular with the residents, forcing it to be moved offshore, and Sartorius was left with the bill. The elite saw it as a tax write-off, but Sartorius had invested everything to keep the plant running. In an effort to save costs, the plant was built with subpar materials, resulting in a small meltdown that drenched Sartorius in radioactive energy, transforming him into Doctor Phosphorus. His skin became translucent, revealing a glowing radioactive skeleton, and his touch became lethal. He also went quite mad. Phosphorus sought revenge on those he blamed for his transformation, the corrupt businessmen who encouraged him to invest and the residents of Gotham who opposed the plant. Naturally, this brought him into conflict with Batman. While Phosphorus is justified in feeling wronged, it's worth noting that his own greed and poor decisions played a part in his downfall. He had chosen to partner with the corrupt businessmen, and he wanted to be part of their group, knowing full well who they were. But try telling him that. By this point, he was completely unhinged, and understandably so given the circumstances. As a Batman villain, Doctor Phosphorus wasn't exactly significant. That said, he did appear in Detective Comics number 1027, Batman's 1000th appearance in the series, where he played a role in a storyline set in the future. In this story, Batman succumbs to cancer caused by a confrontation with Phosphorus years earlier. For all the villains who wanted to kill Batman with their grand schemes, it's almost tragic that his death came as an after effect of battling Phosphorus decades down the line. While Dr. Phosphorus wasn't a major Batman villain, he made more significant appearances in the Starman comics during the 1990s. During the Underworld Unleashed crossover, the demon Neron increased Phosphorus's powers 20-fold in exchange for his immortal soul. Phosphorus was hired by the Mist to kill the original Starman Ted Knight, and repeatedly failed. And this failure weighed heavily on him. His enhanced powers gave him more control over his condition. He could wear clothes and even smoke again, which brought him a strange sense of pleasure. But he still questioned whether it was worth sacrificing his soul for temporary comfort. Despite failing to kill Knight, the battles between them eventually caused Knight to develop cancer, so in a twisted way, Phosphorus did win. The next version of Dr. Phosphorus to mention isn't even Dr. Phosphorus. Instead, it's a character that he inspired, Blight, a villain from Batman Beyond. While their designs were similar, their origins were vastly different. Blight, whose real name was Derek Powers, was a corporate villain who became Blight after exposure to a bioweapon his company had produced. I've already made a video about Blight, which I've linked to in the info button in this video's description, so check that out if you're interested. But to clarify, while Blight was similar to Dr. Phosphorus, it wasn't intentional. Bruce Timm and Glenn Murakami, when creating Blight, initially thought they'd invented a completely original character. They didn't realise until later they'd subconsciously drawn inspiration from Doctor Phosphorus. I mean, let's just compare the designs. Phosphorus started out glowing yellow with bloodshot eyes and wild hair, while Blight is a much sleeker radioactive green figure with charred black bones. I love Bruce Timm's approach to design. He strips away all the unnecessary details and creates clean, streamlined character models. The influence of the DC animated universe on the comics is clear, too, as Doctor Phosphorus has been represented in more recent years as a glowing green skeleton with no hair, no eyes, essentially just a walking X-ray. And the fact that Bruce Timm and Glenn Murakami did not intend to make this reference really amuses me. So now let's talk about Creature Commandos' version of Doctor Phosphorus. In the comics, the Creature Commandos were a military unit consisting of horror-themed characters like Frankenstein's monster, a wolfman, a vampire, and so on. The animated Creature Commandos is a little different. It features inhuman beings like the Bride, and supervillains like Doctor Phosphorus. Essentially, they're the replacement for Task Force X, aka the Suicide Squad, after the government bans weaponizing incarcerated supervillains. Amanda Waller complies with her orders very literally, and assembles a new unit, Task Force M, that consists of beings that are not human. GI Robot, the Weasel, the Bride, Nina Mazursky, and Dr. Phosphorus. Note that the M in Task Force M stands for monster. In Creature Commandos, Dr. Phosphorus is a belligerent and unwilling participant in Waller's team, and he's an unrepentant monster through and through. He takes pleasure in brutally murdering his enemies and shows no remorse. Visually, this version of Phosphorus bears more resemblance to Blight. No bloodshot eyes or scraggly hair here. He hasn't sold his soul to a demon for extra powers either. Everything is streamlined, which I always appreciate. His backstory is also different. Instead of being a greedy businessman, he was a scientist. In this version, after his father died from cancer, Dr. Alex Sartorius sought to find a cure using nuclear fusion. To secure funding, he approached Rupert Thorne, who was planning to share the research with the fascist leaders of a foreign country. Sartorius' wife, who came from an oppressive country, warned him not to share his findings with Thorne, so Sartorius falsified the research to secure the money. When Thorne found out, he murdered Sartorius' wife and son, framing Sartorius for the crime. It's a powerful scene with Thorne's men forcing Sartorius to smear his hands in his family's blood, and to hold the murder weapon to make him look guilty. Thorne then steals Sartorius' research and throws him into a nuclear device to kill him, but instead it transforms him into Doctor Phosphorus. If this were Batman the Animated Series, Doctor Phosphorus would likely have been consumed with slow, methodical revenge, but Creature Commandos is a different beast. While Phosphorus does take revenge on Thorne and his men, he does so quickly and brutally, and he's not at all sad about his condition. He's delighted to replace Thorne and use his powers to become a new kingpin in Gotham, complete with henchmen painted with green skulls. Although he's lost his family and his humanity, he fills the void with money and violence, which seems to genuinely satisfy him, until Batman gets involved. And I really liked this montage scene where it compared Alexander Sartorius, loving husband and family man, to the dancing Dr. Phosphorus, who takes glee in his newfound power and influence, casually murdering people in brutal ways. We don't see exactly how Batman defeats him, probably with some of Alfred's bicarbonate of soda, but Phosphorus is deemed to be no longer human and is sent to Belrive prison. Here, he's implanted with a shock chip, which is less fatal than the Suicide Squad's brain bombs, controlled by Amanda Waller and later by Rick Flag Sr. The Creature Commandos are sent to Pokolistan to fight against the witch Circe and her army of dude bros, the Sons of Themyscira, and Phosphorus plays a small part. He's mostly there to be sarcastic and brutally kill people with his bare hands. Early on in the mission, Phosphorus attempts to escape by sneaking into Flag's room to steal the shock chip's controller. Flag catches him and the two fight. During the fight, Flag makes it clear that they are supposed to be on the same team, and that there are multiple controllers. If Waller finds out what Phosphorus has done, he'll be in deep trouble. Flag doesn't plan on telling her though, which seems to win Phosphorus over. From that point on, Phosphorus cooperates with the team. He enjoys the power he has over others, burning through their flesh and tearing their bodies apart with his hands. However, he is not entirely devoid of humanity. For instance, when he is forced to kill the royal guard Alexei, he expresses some regret as he had genuinely liked him, but it's more the regret that someone shows after having stepped in dog mess rather than profound sadness. Likewise, after the team splits up, Phosphorus takes refuge in a house where a young girl stumbles upon him. For a moment, his long-dormant parental instincts resurface as he feeds and then plays with the girl, something he hasn't done since his son's death. It's a brief, tender moment that contrasts sharply with his unusual monstrous nature. It's an interesting juxtaposition. Phosphorus, a man who once had a family, now finds fleeting comfort in a child's innocence. He may be a monster, but deep down the memory of the man he once was lingers. So in summary, the Creature Commandos version of Doctor Phosphorus is a prime example of how modern reinterpretations can breathe new life into classic characters. While the original Doctor Phosphorus was a sort of tragic figure driven by vengeance, this version embraces his monstrous side with a twisted sense of joy. The streamlined design and updated backstory make him a compelling part of the team and add depth to his character. He's not just a villain, he's a man who lost everything, namely his family and his humanity, but now wields his powers as both a weapon and arguably a shield. While he may be a reluctant member of a team, a hint of the broken man he once was still exists, caught between violence and the faint memory of tenderness. Whether he's burning through enemies or playing with a child, Doctor Phosphorus remains a fascinating character study in loss and transformation. Okay, that's it for this week's essay. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, tell all your friends about me. You know how YouTube works. If you really enjoyed the video and have the means, please consider making use of the thanks button to send a buck or two my way, because every little helps. I offer channel memberships for $1.99 a month. This will get you early access to my weekly video essay, priority responses to your comments, members-only videos, custom emojis, and an icon on your profile indicating that you're one of my people. And special thanks to my current channel members, who are all listed on the screen right now. Next time, I'll be back on Friday to talk about an underrated festive classic episode of Batman the Animated Series, A Bullet for Bullock, another episode that was adapted from a comic book. And next Monday, I'm making the first video based on your responses to my Beware the Batman villain poll. We're going to be talking about Anarchy and how the show's writers took an obscure comic book character and reworked him to become Batman's polar opposite. Hope to see you then.